I'm Benji, and I think that young people should read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass because he is a good role model for all Americans. The narrative shows how Douglass was able to overcome the serious issue of slavery by looking at both sides of the conflict and then working to prove that slavery was detrimental to both slaves and slaveholders. There are still many problems in the world, and young people are the ones that will need to confront them. Douglass's wisdom and logic can be applied to many of those issues. Many problems exist today because groups of people believe that other groups of people aren't as good as them or that they are criminals. This is very similar to what most white people thought in the 1800s. They believed they were much smarter and more sophisticated than the African slaves. When Douglass had escaped and was in the North, he saw that people had these misconceptions, and he used his experience to disprove them. Many issues would not exist today if people used Douglass's logic to solve them.
Isaac, and reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass showed me how much of a role model Douglass was and how much of an inspiration he had on stopping slavery. Most people nowadays think they can't make a change. Douglass teaches them that not only can they make a tiny but a huge change. Douglass fought hard to abolish slavery, and in return he got true freedom. Douglass wasn't just an inspiration, but a great role model. This is why I'm proud to be helping Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives in their 1 Million Abolitionists project. You should too.
My name is Molly, and when I first learned about human trafficking, I felt helpless because I didn't know how I could help the situation in my position. Then I read Frederick Douglass's narrative, and I was inspired by how passionately Frederick Douglass worked towards his goal, no matter what the circumstances were. He used whatever tools at his disposal to fight for what he believed in, and using multiple perspectives to get as many people on his side as possible. And he also had a first-hand experience, so people were more likely to listen to him, and they did listen to him. And in Frederick Douglass's own mind, his most powerful tool was agitation, and so he used that word a lot and agitated a lot of people. And so when I read Frederick Douglass's book, I was inspired to change the world just as he had changed the world. And I think that if young children could read the book, they would be inspired just like I've been inspired to fight for what they believe in and change the world for the better, make it a better place. And Frederick Douglass once said that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I think this quote is true because children have their whole lives to change the world, and if they're inspired at a young age, then they'll have greater power and more motivation to do that.
Hi, my name's Kai. I want you to read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass so we can get the word out about Frederick Douglass and teach other generations how we got slavery abolished. Frederick Douglass was a role model in many ways. He taught his fellow slaves how to read and write, and he also taught them how to think freely and be free. Thank you for your time.
My name is Joey, and I believe young people should read Frederick Douglass's narrative because he played a huge part in abolishing slavery in the past. People, especially youth, should know his story and what he went through so it can inspire them to act and not just react. These days, if past forms of slavery are taught in classrooms, it isn't that in-depth. So, reading the narrative could just be a good alternative for those lessons. Frederick is a role model because a form of slavery still exists today, known as human trafficking. What he did will inspire people to do something. If Frederick Douglass could abolish slavery, then we can now, and youth is where it all starts. If young people take action, they will be a massive part in eradicating human trafficking for good. So many people don't know about Frederick Douglass, and they should. If more people know about him, there will be a much higher chance of 1 or 1,000 people taking action. There are people in the world who can do something about this, and it's our job to show them the horrors of human trafficking. Reading the narrative changed my thinking because before, all I knew was that slavery was something and that it existed. Now I know what it was like to be a slave, in this case, Frederick Douglass.
Hi, my name is Justin, and today I'm here to talk about the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. The narrative is important to me because it was written out of pure bravery. Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave who was sticking up for the other slaves with his narrative. And Frederick Douglass was a role model for America because he was smart, brave, and very persistent.
My name is Natasha. Young people all around the world are victims of human trafficking and modern-day slavery today, more so than ever before. I believe that people of all ages should be educated about this problem to help fight back, and I believe one of the best ways to do that is by reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I strongly believe that no matter what any situation anyone is in, everyone can help completely eradicate modern-day slavery. If we applied Douglass's wisdom to help fight modern-day slavery, it would be beneficial.
Hi, my name is Schaefer, and young people should read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass because in it shows how bad his situation was and how he was able to get out of slavery. He didn't just feel bad for himself or try to hide. He stood up for himself and his rights. Reading the narrative will inspire young people who are in a tough situation to try and work to change what they're going through. They will see how he was able to get out of slavery and know that they can get out of their challenges too. When I read the narrative, I saw what he was able to do and knew that I could get through anything also. Now I know that if you don't give up and are willing to work, you can change your life forever.
My name is Blake, and I'm here to talk about Frederick Douglass and the lessons he's taught me in life. Frederick Douglass has taught me lessons in life such as, if times get rough, just push through it and do your best. And if you have something important to say it and express your full feelings and emotion. Frederick Douglass was an important abolitionist in history that helped stop and abolish slavery. Frederick Douglass might not have worn a cape, but he sure was a hero. I think kids should have the chance to read the narrative for themselves. Thank you for your time.
My name is Noria. To me, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass means that you could do anything, no matter how hard your situation is. Frederick Douglass said himself that knowledge is the pathway to freedom. He learned this by overhearing Mr. Auld, his former slave master, talking to his wife about how if you teach a slave to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He immediately understood this and decided to teach himself to read. While reading, he figured out what was actually going on in the world and chose to do something about it. I was astonished that someone that had written so many inspiring and complex things could have taught themselves to read. I encourage you to read this narrative and share what it means to you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julia, and I have a question for you. Have you ever wanted to change the world but didn't know how? Well, I know someone who did know, Frederick Douglass. In his autobiography, The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, he highlights his developments, discoveries, and strategies that he used to change the devastating reality of his time, slavery. In reading his book, I learned the consequences slavery had on both parties, slave-holders and slaves, and discovered how education can be a path to freedom. In addition, his book showed how Douglass is a strong example of someone who changed the future even with the challenges that were present. When fighting for the abolishment of slavery, Douglass was able to recognize the detrimental effects slavery had on both slaves and slaveholders. Recognizing this perspective allowed him to persuade many people to join his cause. We can also look at Douglass's life to recognize how he fought back against the negative expectations that were put upon him. He refused to succumb to the notion that he was supposed to sit back and accept that he was a slave. In fact, he states this in his book by saying, "I now resolve that however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever when I could be a slave in fact." Douglass is also able to recognize the key role education played in solving difficult issues. Many people today who are working with modern-day problems, such as human trafficking, also realize how important education is, especially when making people aware of a problem. This is why I think people should also read his book, to gain new knowledge, a new point of view, and new strategies, and use these tools to work for change and fight for what they believe in.
Hi, my name is Maddie. After reading Frederick Douglass's narrative, my thinking around this particular piece of American history was greatly impacted. Before reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, I was aware of the USA's slave trading and slaveholding history, and the man who played a large role in abolishing it. However, I did not realize how horrible and painful it was to be enslaved. Frederick Douglass showed me the way through the door of exploration. I welcomed him, reluctantly, but he still took me through his memories and experiences of being enslaved, showing me his own life openly. This book inspired me and impacted the way I think about life.
Hello, I'm Isaiah, and the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass really means a lot to me, mainly because it opened up so many eyes to the grueling nature of slavery. And me and my father are both African American, so if we were born during a time in which slavery was still a legal practice, I might be enslaved, he might be enslaved, we might not have been born, and at least if we were, we would have been subject to terrible discrimination, if not enslavement. And the society at the time really allowed white people to abuse African Americans and that included beatings and verbal language. And one particular instance happened with Frederick Douglass, who was the author of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, where a man named Covey took a wooden slab and beat Douglass upon the back of the head with it because at the time Frederick was his slave. So he had fallen ill and stopped working. And that very well could have been my father and I's reality, which is a tiny bit hard to think about. But one of the modern effects of slavery is racism, and racism is a social construct used as a means to put one down or raise another one up. And Frederick Douglass, working as an abolitionist, really understood the importance of looking at both sides of slavery, slave and slaveholder. So when you look at a problem like racism, you have to look at victim and the person who's being racist or abusive or whatever. So when someone's racist to you, it makes you more prone to be racist back to either him or she or to someone else, and then that continues on in its own little cycle. And as previously stated, racism is a social construct. I believe that if racism can be constructed by social means, it can be deconstructed by social means, and so it should.
Hi, my name is Dante. Our class has been studying slavery. Slavery is still happening today, although it is outlawed in every country in the world. You can help stop this by donating to the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative, which is run by Kenneth B. Morris, a direct descendant of Frederick Douglass, as well as Booker T. Washington. This book, The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, has made a huge impact on the way I see slavery today and in the past.
My name is Keenan, and before I read the narrative, I never understood slavery as a whole. I didn't know how cruel slaveholders are and were. Modern-day slavery, human trafficking, happens against the law but is still hard to catch. I didn't know what needed to be done. We need to end slavery like Douglass did in the 1800s. If you want to stay ignorant about slavery, then do. But I strongly encourage you to read the narrative and support the 1 Million Abolitionists Project. $4 is not very much, but it could change the thinking of you and others.
Hello, my name is Rennie. This year, my class and I read Frederick Douglass's narrative. When I was reading his book, it really inspired me to change issues in the world. As Frederick Douglass would say, agitate, agitate, agitate. Whether there's a problem in the past or present, Frederick Douglass's concept of agitation is very prevalent to fight a problem you have. Frederick Douglass's problem was he was born in slavery. He knew how horrible slavery was on a first-hand account, so after he escaped his plantation, he fought to abolish it until his death. Frederick Douglass's story made me feel like if he fought slavery and its bloodstained chains, I could fight any problem I wanted. His story could inspire you like me, or just amaze you with what he did in his life.
My name is Sean. When I first read The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, it really impacted me by the way he didn't just think about himself, but he thought about others. One way he thought about others is that he wrote his narrative, The Life of Frederick Douglass, with the risk of being returned to slavery. But with the risk, he still wrote the narrative and inspired many people to help abolish slavery.
Frederick Douglass had a life that changed American history. He was born a slave, and he saw how ridiculous it was that something as simple as the color of his skin decided his worth as a being, so he decided to change that. When he was a young man, he escaped from slavery and said he would never again be treated any less than human. America is built on a simple idea that all men are created equal. Yet, over 50 years after these words were written, many men, women, and children were still treated like property. Douglass's narrative shows the importance of equality. When groups discriminate against each other, the society turns into a dystopia, with some groups having all of the power and the other groups holding none of it. America was like this, and Douglass worked hard to change that. This was the work that abolished slavery. However, the after effects of historic slavery still exist. People have learned to hate and be afraid of different groups. Racism still has horrible effects, and people get killed because of it. Heterosexual white men still run most of the government. We have not had a single female president, and we've only had one president who is a person of color. We need to take Douglass's example and fight for what we believe is right. Children really are our future, and we need to teach them how to change it.
Hi, my name is Xander, and when I first read The Life of Frederick Douglass, it inspired me. It inspired me enough to know If we give it to others, it can inspire them. Inspiring others can help us end inhumane treatments such as human trafficking and racism.
My name is Piers. Frederick Douglass gives us an idea of how to work hard. No matter your life or your working conditions are, you can improve them. Even Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, worked hard to learn. He defended himself from being whipped and worked on an escape plan. He worked on to abolish slavery and was successful by becoming an abolitionist and the founder of the North Star newspaper. He was persistent to the end.
My name is Isabella. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Harriet Tubman. These are a few of the individuals responsible for abolishing historic slavery. Kenneth B. Morris Jr., Robert Benz, Shyama Hall. These are a few of the individuals working to eradicate human trafficking. All across the planet, millions of people are being held against their will, forced to work inhumanely hard for inhumanely long periods of time with little or no compensation. This is the only life that some individuals have known. This was their past, this is their present, this may be their future, but it doesn't have to be. It is said that we control our fates, but in order to write the future, we must first read the past. We have abolished slavery, and now we must eradicate it. Eradicate, eradicate, eradicate.